Okay. Hello, my name is Milan, and I am doing the topic of my presentation is the Doctrine of Discovery and its legacy and impact on Indigenous sovereignty. So in this presentation, I'm using two technologies to make sure that the delivery and engagement of the content. First, I use Zoom to record the presentation um, and to make sure the presentation can be shared and accessed in a convenient manner. And second, I am using Google Slides to host and structure the presentation to give a visualized, organized platform for the content. So, for the overview of this presentation, or of this topic, the doctrine of discovery is a legal and religious framework that is used by the European colonial powers to justify the exploration and conquest of the colonization of lands inhabited by the indigenous people. This doctrine was central to the disposition of indigenous lands in Canada and other colonized regions, as deemed lands not occupied by Christians as terra nullius or empty land available for claim. The the doctrine of discovery continues to influence Canadian law, particularly in relation to Indigenous sovereignty and land rights, as principles have been embedded in the legal framework that governs Indigenous territories. So the historical impact. The Indian Act of 1876 established not new, but a reserve system in Canada that continues to have a significant impact on First Nation communities today. This system was designed to confine Indigenous people to specific areas of land, disrupting their traditional ways of life and contributing to ongoing and marginalization of these communities. The reserve system has played a major role in perpetuating poverty and systemic issues with Indigenous populations, reflecting the broader influence of the doctrine of discovery on Indigenous land rights and governance. The legacy of this act demonstrates how colonial policies have long-lasting effects on Indigenous communities, continuing to influence the social, economic, and political realities. So some of the important issues raised, the doctrine of discovery has led to ongoing legal discrimination against Indigenous land rights in Canada. This discrimination is part of the colonial mentality that was established during the European expansion, and has been perpetuated throughout the Canadian legislation. The legal cases such as, hopefully I'm not butchering this, the Tilshkat Nation versus British Columbia. That legal case highlights the challenges that Indigenous communities face in protecting their sovereignty and land rights. The colonial concept embeds in Canadian law creates a significant obstacle for Indigenous people as they seek to assert their rights and maintain control over their territories. These issues underscore, these issues show that the need for critical examination of these legal structure that continue to disadvantage Indigenous communities and lower their self-governance. So see, these were some of the images that I had used for this presentation. Um, the First Nation cultural imagery. Um, I've used this to show how important the Indigenous perspective and aesthetics. So this first image right here um, shows um, the impact of the Doctrine of Discovery and on Indigenous land rights in Canada. It's just our image that's depicted over here. This image is also the citation for this image is over here as well. Another image that I've used um, was from the film The Doctrine of Discovery, which shows like the personal and historical narratives um, of the Haudenosaunee. Hopefully, I'm not butchering that as well. And the citation for that image as well as over here as well. The other two images that I've used were for the connection between the doctrine of discovery and Canadian law, um, as discussed in this article by Reed.J. And the fourth and last image is about the ongoing relevance, the ongoing relevance of the colonial legacies and also the oath of allegiance to the Queen in Canada, as explored by Mick Mahon. So yeah, so just a general overview of this is that the Doctor of Discovery is basically this complex and legal and religious framework that has played an important role in the colonization of indigenous lands around the world. The presentation provides like an overview of the historical of the doctrine, also looking at where it has originated and how it's been applied in context to the Canadian law. The doctrine's significance lies in how it's used as a justification for the disposition of indigenous lands, um, as it had allowed the European powers to claim the territories that were already inhabited by indigenous peoples. Um, and another thing that we have explored through this presentation is the contemporary relevance of the doctrine and specifically the relation of indigenous sovereignty and the ongoing struggles of indigenous communities to assert their rights and maintain their control over their territories. So, the final part is the historical impact. Um, the Indian Act of 1876 and the reserve system um, established that basically they're established as prime examples how lasting impacts of the doctrine of discovery on Indigenous communities in Canada. The Indian Act was made to manage and control Indigenous populations by basically confining them into a specific land of and disrupting like their way of living and how they go throughout life. Um, and it restricts their autonomy as well. Um, the reserve system was made under the act um, that basically it had far and long-lasting consequences, um, and contributing to that, it also added on to the marginalization of indigenous communities and the poverty and systemic issues in that area. The relevance between the Indian Act and the Reserve shows how the influence of colonial policies and the need for the critical assessment of these like systems um, need to be adjusted because there's lots of injustice that are faced by the Indigenous people. So this is the end of my presentation. Here are all of the references, and yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation, and hope you have a great day.